So across the world, 23 billion messages are sent every single day. How do I know this? Well, it's because I read it on a website that said statistics in the title, so obviously it's true. But the question is, how did we get here? Where did this all come from? Is what I want to know. And, well, I mean, I do know now because I've researched it all, but I want to tell you how all this happened. Now, I'm talking about real physical things that had words written on them that occasionally come in fancy little suits that we call envelopes. And in order to do that, we've got to go way back in time. I'm talking 8000 BC. The first written language was developed in a place called Sumer in a very well-known area of the world called Mesopotamia. Well, I mean, it's not called Mesopotamia anymore, but it was called Mesopotamia. It was essentially the first ever ancient sort of civilization that was ever formed. Cuneiform, as they called it, was essentially a bunch of symbols and dots and lines that would be incised onto clay tablets using a reed stylus. Last time I used a stylus was back in, I don't know, 2008 or something, back on PictoChat on the DS Lite. But it did take thousands and thousands of years for it to become a bit more commonly used, which takes us to 3200 BC. The act of sending letters themselves was also introduced in the region. I mean, to be fair, pretty much everything that ever existed can probably be traced all the way back to Mesopotamia. I mean, there are literal books dedicated to all the sort of firsts that occurred in Mesopotamia. The Assyrians, also in Mesopotamia, were the first to sort of institute a postal system, which was at the time exclusively used by sort of kings and officials. I mean, the average person couldn't read or write at this time, so, you know, kings and officials were the only people that were capable of doing so. I mean, I don't know why they didn't just send emojis instead. I mean, you've got a face, you've got a wet clay tablet, you know what to do. You pull a face that you want to send, and then you imprint it on your clay tablet, just like so. And then release, and all of a sudden you've got something to send to your friend. Paper didn't exist at the time, and so neither did envelopes. Instead of this, they would wrap their clay tablets in another layer of clay called boule. Boule? Boule. I think it's boule. Possibly, I don't know.
Stop it. Get some help.
It must have been kind of difficult to open the clay envelope without smashing the actual clay tablet. Like paper, you can just like tear. Clay, you've got to sort of smash it to open it. What if you smashed the clay envelope and it broke the clay tablet? Do they not think of these practical aspects when they create things in their time? For the invention of paper, we've got to move a little bit west out of Mesopotamia into ancient Egypt in 3000 BC. The papyrus water plant was used to create things like cloth, sails, cords, and of course, papyrus paper. Papyrus. I do like that word, papyrus. 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 So instead of having to write incredibly tiny little words on a clay tablet or cylinder, which they used to do, they could now write books in the forms of scrolls and just add more and more on the further they wanted to write, I guess. Papyrus paper was actually used into the 11th century, even though the paper we know and love today was actually invented in the 8th century. So clearly paper was not all it was cracked up to be at that time. Although things began and started to develop in Mesopotamia, it was actually the Persian Achaemenid Empire which instituted a more fully developed postal system. At its peak, the empire actually spanned a total of 2.1 million square miles. I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to get from one end to the other without Google Maps. It must have been a bit of a challenge. I mean, I can't even get 5 minutes down the road without the help of Mr. Tom Thomas.
At the end of the road, you are a moron.
Darius the Great, one of the leaders of the Persian Empire, built highways to connect the major cities of his empire. Most notably was the 1,500-mile-long Royal Road, which connected the capital city of Susa to Sardis. To put into perspective just how long that is, essentially the Royal Road was 2 UK lengths long, which is kind of crazy. And it would take about 7 to 9 days to get from one end to the other, which in fairness, is about how long it would take to deliver a letter via royal mail these days. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, it's a very difficult word to say that, jeez, Herodotus. They described them in such high regard, using a very complimentary language. The words he used are actually now the unofficial motto of the US Postal Service. So it's really good to see that they uphold this message in every situation. But after these developments, there was very little change on how people would send letters for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. There were various ways to try and improve and adapt the process, but none of them really stuck. One example is how we used to use animals. We do always love to find ways to stop animals from having fun and living their lives, and instead using them to our own advantage. The first major changes to sending messages since the Persian Empire came during the Industrial Revolution. To be honest, I don't know why they didn't just invent the technology like centuries before. I mean, come on, it just seems like a smart idea to have developed it earlier, but you know, some people just don't have that creative knowledge and ideas like I do. The pedal bike was used to replace horses over short distances, sort of from one town to the next to deliver post. But following this, the big guns began to be invented and created to really start cooking with gas. Literally, I guess, you know. The train was invented on the 12th of February 1804, and it also came with plenty of Call of Duty style attachments to improve the ability to deliver post. The first postal railway in England was actually created beginning to be created in 1830, connecting Liverpool to Manchester. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, you're just going from one football city to the next. I mean, it doesn't seem very worthwhile to me. And then in the mid-1900s, the automobiles were starting to be used to deliver post. And now that was a real game changer. I mean, just imagine the amount of post you can carry in a car compared to a horse. I mean, mind-blowing, honestly. I mean, to be fair, initially it may have been slower than me trying to ride a bike and deliver post that way. But, you know, it was still advancements nonetheless. I'm disabled is the joke there.
Yeah, no.
The Mailster in particular was one of my favourites of all time in terms of delivering post. I'd love to have one of these just in my back garden to chill in. I don't know why. I would just enjoy it so much. It looks so cool. Airmail and steamboats were also starting to be used, and this was sort of like the first sign of being able to send a message across Satan's homeland that we call the ocean. But then the internet came into play. Move aside letters and mail and all that crap, the internet is now taking center stage. Email was introduced in 1971, although initially it was only able to be used for computers that functioned on the same network. And then, as I said at the beginning of this video, in 1992 the first SMS was sent from a computer of all things. It wasn't even sent from a phone. A crazy comparison of statistics is that in 2000, around 35 messages were sent per person per month, when then 23 years later in 2023, it's now 32 messages per person per day. Now that might not seem that interesting or whatever alone, but if you compare that change happened in 23 years, when it took about 10,000 years for us to get from the first written language all the way to being able to send it across space, really. 23 years, 10,000 years. It's crazy to think that that's how fast things have evolved now. And that's one thing I love about history is you can see the developments happening and people value those new things so much more compared to how we do now, because we don't have the time to appreciate the new inventions and the new events that happen nowadays, because things develop so quickly. Whereas in history it would take decades or centuries for new creations to come about, and people really were able to appreciate what was put in front of them. And before it was just so localized societies developing on their own, and now we've got everyone developing as a world together. It's fascinating to see sort of the comparisons Not just between now and history, but just between various points in history through time and how things developed. I just love it so much, man, honestly. And so if there's one thing I'd like people to take away from this video and every one of my videos, is that don't take the developments and creations and just things in general we have nowadays for granted, because they change so quickly. Just appreciate how good we have it nowadays. And so yeah, I will probably, will catch you in the next video I create, because, you know, it's my video, I'll be in it. See ya!